Are we ready? Ready up there? Oh, don't leave. Come back. Sorry. Thank you for your patience. Welcome to our final lecture of this academic year, 2015-16. My name is Stephen Rost. I'm the interim chair of art and design. It's my pleasure to welcome you. And one thing I'd also like to, here we go. We would like to just give you a heads up on Design Week, what are the dates of Design Week? April 28th to the 30th. And it will be an intense chunk of time, and I encourage everybody to rest up for that and engage, whether you have work in the conversation or if you just want to swing by and participate in the conversation. It's going to be a Thursday, Friday, and Saturday is dedicated to graduate studios, and we'll be down. No, that's not true.
Thursday and Friday are on campus here.
Right.
And there's a blend between everything from first year to fifth year, Thursday and Friday.
Right.
Thursday is in the morning, afternoon, and evening. Friday is just the morning and the afternoon. And then on Saturday we're at ECDT, and that's a blend between the art and design department and the architecture department, where we're running in the afternoon all the graduate thesis presentations.
I was partially correct. Thank you.
No, you did brilliant up to the point when you explained it.
And that's why we rely on Philip Plowright. Thank you. So without any further ado, I'd like to allow Dr. June Kim the opportunity to introduce our guest.
Thank you, Steve.
You're welcome.
Okay, so welcome to our college's lecture series. Today's speaker is Mr. Jason Roberts. I'd like to read a brief statement about his background. So there goes. Jason Roberts is the founder of the Oak Cliff Transit Authority, originator of the Better Block project, co-founder of the Art Conspiracy and Bike-Friendly Oak Cliff, and candidate for US Congress. In 2006, Jason formed the nonprofit organization Oak Cliff Transit Authority to revive the Dallas streetcar system, and later spearheaded the city's effort in garnering a $23 million Tiger stimulus grant from the FTA to help reintroduce a modern streetcar system to Dallas. In 2010, Jason organized a series of Better Block projects, taking blighted blocks with vacant properties in southern Dallas and converting them into temporary walkable districts with pop-up businesses, bike lanes, cafe, seating, and landscaping. The project has now become an international movement, occurring everywhere from Melbourne, Australia to Tehran, Iran, and has been featured in the New York Times, Duel Magazine, TED Talks, and National Public Radio. Jason received a Champions of Change award from the White House in 2012, and his consulting firm, Team Better Block, was showcased in the US Pavilion at the Venice Biennale. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Jason Roberts.
Thank you. It's really good to be here. I am Jason from Dallas, Texas. So, in fact, I was just in St. Paul yesterday. I was telling the group that brought me over here that worked late into the night and then flew home and literally slept in my bed. I got on a plane early this morning and came back to Detroit. So it wasn't the smartest planning on my part. I could have probably just taken a car over, but. Anyways, it's great to be here. I have an organization called the Better Block Foundation, and again, that we started this project in 2010. really just out of frustration in our neighborhood because we weren't getting things happening. We wanted to have a lot of cool things to go to in our neighborhood. I saw a lot of great things happening around the world and just thought, what could we do to spark things changing now as opposed to waiting for, years for things to materialize. But my background wasn't in architecture or urban planning or anything like that. I fixed computers for a living. So I worked in rooms that looked just like this, that were full of cables and wires, and it was cold and air conditioning and too much, and it was completely dark. But it was, so during the day, really, I had not much of a social life, really. But my one kind of cool factor was at night I played in rock bands. So I'd go out with my rock band, and we'd go and we'd play around. We'd come to the Midwest. We'd go to Chicago, and we'd go to like Brooklyn, and I got to oftentimes go to little parts of cities like in Indianapolis and play in parts of town that most people were kind of avoiding. But I thought it was amazing that the artist community that really had nothing could make a lot of these places come to life. So a lot of the inspiration for the work came from this musical connection, but also one other thing too, and it's something I don't bring up a lot, but if anyone knows the work of Christopher Alexander, who wrote a book called The Pattern Language, which really just basically takes down and it tries to dissect these patterns that we've developed over tens of thousands of years as humans, and tries to identify what are those things that we continue to do that are beautiful, that we love, that we respond to, and they evoke emotions and feelings. Well, his work really wasn't picked up that much right after it was produced in the 70s by the architectural community, but it was picked up by the programming community. In fact, most of the programs that you work with on your phones and everything uses something on the back end called object-oriented programming. And that's what I developed a lot. I worked in object-oriented programming. It took basically what he was trying to identify with the built environment and said, hey, this is a great idea, and this would work to build computer languages with the same kind of concepts. So kind of my world of urban planning, urban design came from marrying these two worlds of the arts and computers. But it also came from traveling too, and seeing great places, and seeing the scale of these places. And it took me a long time to understand what I was responding to in a lot of these places was the scale. This kind of not really even realizing that, how come the streets in Amsterdam are 1/3 the size of the streets in Dallas, and there's obviously there's a lot of reasons for that, but it was understanding not only having that, but also understanding how do we feel as a community when we're in places like this, and how do we feel back in my hometown. And then beyond that, just kind of having conversations with the city and trying to figure out how do we get change going, and then talking about the stories of our past, because we used to have these beautiful main streets. And I talked to my parents who lived in a little town called Surreal, Oklahoma, which was very surreal for me to look at these pictures because I didn't have this type of environment. I didn't have bands playing out in the street. I didn't have, my dad would talk about how they knew the local pharmacist and they knew the local people that owned the hardware stores, and everybody was looking out for each other, and everyone was friends. And I said, the environment that I grew up in, it had a lot of stuff that looked like this. And it was a lot of these chain stores. I didn't have this little local kind of diner at the end of my street. I had a little Caesars with a kid from high school that didn't want to work there, which was really angry. And so so anyways, our work kind of was with this premise of how do we make change, and seeing also that I was seeing cool little interventions happening. I was seeing what was happening in New York with Times Square being transformed into a pedestrian plaza, and seeing the parking day projects happening in San Francisco. But when you live in a place like Dallas, you're told by everybody that, honestly, it's just too hot here. People will not go outside and will not linger. It's a car culture, so this is not Paris, so don't try to make it Paris. So I was really frustrated with that idea. I was really frustrated, why would we create environments like this? Why would we even, what's the point of, why would I spend 50 weeks a year working in a place I don't want to be, and then take 2 weeks for vacation going somewhere I would rather be? So the work I started was kind of breaking down, how do I start just working with my arts community to get started? Because I don't have money, and I was told you can fix any problem as long as you have money. Well, if you don't have money, how do you get started? Started with an old theater I had in my neighborhood. And this is a theater called the Texas Theater, and the only reason it has a sign on it was because Oliver Stone built that sign for the movie JFK, because this is where Lee Harvey Oswald was captured after the assassination of JFK. And it's about 7 blocks from where I lived. It had been closed for about 10 years. It had caught on fire at one point in time. And there was a group that was trying to raise $3 million to repair it, but they were having a hard time finding the funds. I just wanted to get in there and do stuff with some people. Like, let's just make this work. Let's do something now if we can. Again, inspired by like looking at there's a guy named Steve Keen in New York that I thought was amazing. He would go and take an art gallery in New York, and he would announce the day before he had an art show, come out to my art show, and have no art that night before. And then he would just fill up the building with 100 blank canvases and paint them all the night before. And then he would open up the next day and announce this art gallery. So I thought, I probably don't have anybody crazy enough to do 100 pieces of art in my neighborhood, but I might have 100 people that can all do one piece of art. And then also, as artists, we're often asked to donate things, and that's kind of frustrating because you get asked so much, and people don't understand that this takes a lot of your time and a lot of your energy. So what if we just ask people for 2 or 3 hours of time? That's not a giant ask. So again, this is us in the theater weeks before. Again, this had been just completely barren, boarded up, in fact. The lights barely worked. The plumbing was backed up. We had 2 bathrooms. One of them didn't work upstairs. In fact, it was leaking. And moments before about to open the doors, we're thinking this is going to be a horrible failure. It's the middle of winter. We're in the bad side of town. We're in Oak Cliff where people don't want to go. But what happened was when we opened the doors, we had 700 people show up. And we sold every piece of art that we had created the night before with the community. And beyond that, we had people come up to us afterwards and say, we've been waiting for someone to let us into this theater. We've been waiting for someone to give us access to this so we can actually start using this and doing this. This is great. And I started showing up to the local board meetings for the theater. And then what I found is, and this is what you got to be careful of, when you say, hey, I want to help, I became the president of the theater within 2 months. so be careful when we say, hey, I'm here to help. They'll throw the keys at you. But what we also did, and I don't talk about a lot, and I wish I had images of this, but we didn't even have a screen for a movie theater. So I'd go, and we didn't have a sound system. So I went around, and we found a screen in someone's backyard, and we grabbed it. We came back with a U-Haul truck. We slung it up to the rafters, and so for a time, we didn't even have a sound system. So then we went and got on Craigslist and found a piano. We brought a piano in, and we just have neighbors playing the piano while we showed silent films. And it was just a way for us to kind of get the theater working. And people kept coming in and seeing what we're doing, and then we gained a little bit of money, and then we got some more donations, and we got a sound system. And now it's actually a thriving and functioning facility in our neighborhood. People love the space. It does a yearly film festival. It's active. It's running. It doesn't have the $3 million of repairs done to it yet, but the people that are running it now are actually filmmakers. And it has the coolest people coming in and out of this space from around the world regularly. All right, so the next big thing for me was realizing, like, okay, if I can get people in my neighborhood fired up about transforming an old building, what else can we bring back to life? I'd always been a history buff, so I came to my neighborhood, and of course, downtown Dallas is just the top right. This neighborhood's Oak Cliff. And if you look at these bold black lines, at the elbows or the intersections of these black lines, we have these little clusters of neighborhood Main Street style buildings, these 0 lot line buildings that create that beautiful historic wall. And in fact, my Texas theater was at where C is, right there, so right there. But the theater had 650 seats and only 35 parking spaces. So the reality is, the reason this worked before, when we started asking questions, was because we found out this was all a trolley system. We had a trolley system that ran from 1888 to about 1956. And a lot of the problems that we were dealing with in my neighborhood now were the ramifications that came from pulling that streetcar system out. Because we could not accommodate for the buildings that we had there. We couldn't get certain businesses in place because the zoning wouldn't allow it because we didn't have X amount of parking. Because the buildings weren't even built at a time when you were having to think about parking. So frustrated and trying to figure out what can we do to fix things in our neighborhood, I suggested an idea. I was like, I've got an idea. Why don't we bring back the streetcar system? And people said, that's absolutely crazy. You can't bring back a trolley system. It's been gone for half a century, right? Again, I was a computer guy, so I knew how to build websites. So I went home that night and built a fake website called the Oak Cliff Transit Authority. And it looked really official. It had about pages and boards and news, and I had pictures of European trolleys on the front. And the next week, I had the local newspaper come out and did a story that said, dreaming the day the streetcars return. That's what Jason Roberts and other members of the recently formed Oak Cliff Transit Authority are hoping. But there were no other members. And beyond that, I had people in my neighborhood contact me and say, wait, we've got a transit authority? This is amazing. How do we get involved with this thing? And it turns out within my own neighborhood, just by putting a stake in the ground, people started calling. And it turns out I had a civil engineer in my neighborhood that said, I've always wanted to bring back the trolley too. I will donate time to develop 100 hours pro bono for a feasibility study, which that was a huge thing for us. It's about a $30,000 ask. And another guy in my neighborhood that looked like Santa Claus, an 80-year-old guy with a big old beard. It turns out he's one of the foremost streetcar enthusiasts in the world. He's well known. And he had enough parts in his garage to build a streetcar. So I had a pretty cool army to start with. So we created an official organization. So we got the Oak Cliff Transit Authority going. We're going to start fighting for this streetcar system. While we're looking at streetcars, we're starting also noticing the bicycle infrastructure in other cities. But what I'm seeing with bicycle infrastructure is everybody wearing spandex and Lycra, and we're all doping, and we're going 300 miles somewhere. And that's not the kind of bicycling I wanted to do. I wanted to do this small kind of ride to the grocery store bicycling. So we created a group called Bike Friendly Oak Cliff that said, like, we're going to advocate for this idea of just everybody riding their old heavy bikes to the grocery store and to the post office. And so I started getting excited about this bicycling idea, and I went to City Hall and started saying, hey, I've got this great idea. I'm seeing this in all these great cities. We're going to take all these giant roads we have now, and we're going to cut them in half, and we're going to put bike lanes everywhere. And I found out when you're the one guy that does that at City Hall, you're going to have a lot of people that look like this come out and say, no! So this guy apparently was not a fan of riding bikes. But beyond that, I found that people had these assumptions that it was going to be Carmageddon, and that business would die as we know it. We would all just face a slow, painful death when our roads were changed. So we decided just to kind of let's just go and just do some fun group rides to get people out and doing these things. And again, we thought we'd have 20 people that show up for those first few rides. We actually had 150 people show up for those first rides. This is us kind of riding. We're following the trail of Lee Harvey Oswald into our neighborhood because that was what we could celebrate in Oak Cliff. And I tell people, what you don't see is me looking terrified at the front of this line because I didn't own a bicycle when we started Bike Friendly Oak Cliff. I just love the idea of having a bike culture. But I also, I found that my community was waiting for people to stand up and lead a charge. People are all looking for someone to stand up and say, hey, there's a new way forward. There's better things to do. We don't have to live with this disparate conditions we've been given. And I did not want to be that leader. I was not wired up for that at all. But there was a point where I'm like, well, I'm just gonna fill that guy's shoes until whoever comes along is supposed to do this will do this. The important thing here to know is if you're passionate about something, you have everything it takes to become a leader. And I've seen this time and again. You all have these things you're fired up about. Just if you stand out in front and just say, hey, look, I'm willing to kind of go out and just try to push this forward a little bit further, you may be surprised at the kind of army you can amass in such a short amount of time. One of the projects I was trying to do is I tried to get simple ways to get kids to ride bicycles. I went to my kids' school, and we had no kids riding bikes at all, 0 kids riding bicycles. When I was a kid, half the school rode. So I tried to figure out, how do I get kids to ride? Well, why don't I just do punch cards? That's cheap and easy. If kids ride their bikes to school for a week, every day we'll punch a card, and at the end of the week, we'll all celebrate, and we'll go get root beer floats together at a local kind of shop, one of those old 0-lot line buildings. So we went from 0 kids riding to 100 kids riding within a week. In fact, this event now happens twice a year. It's happening right now in my city, so I'm missing it right now. But the fire department now takes part, and the police department takes part. Everybody kind of takes part in this thing. It's a big, epic kind of thing now. And I've gotten bike lanes installed in front of the schools now, bike racks everywhere. A lot of fun things just because we just programmed something fun and silly for the community to do. And we went from being the worst city for bicycling in the entire nation with absolutely no bike infrastructure, no bike lanes, no nothing, to this, this is a bike lane that I helped design and build in my neighborhood. Again, I fixed computers for a living, so it was an interesting kind of jump for me to kind of understand these things. And this is even the best designed bike lane. I would have designed this far better with time. But it was a stake in the ground. And since that time, we've had people come into my neighborhood that everyone's buying bikes, and they're all saying, I guess we're in the bike part of town, which we were just joking because we just told people we were in the bike part of town, and it became a self-fulfilling prophecy. So it's been really interesting to kind of see how this has reshaped a culture All right. So we worked on the theater and worked on the streetcar and was working on bicycle infrastructure. We started looking at the blocks themselves. So how do you repair a block that's broken? And this is a block that we started with. It was in my neighborhood. Former streetcar stop. It was a road that was turned into a one-way couplet. They call it, or couplet, or one-way pair. They call these things. The sidewalks were thinned. Landscaping removed. The zoning was changed from retail to light industrial. Because there's no parking, because they wouldn't want retail because you can't park cars, right? And the only way you can park cars in a beautiful kind of corridor like this, where you have four corners still preserved and everything, is to tear one of those buildings down. And that's what we've learned, and I've seen it time and again. And then beyond that, we created all these ordinances and rules that made either expensive or illegal to do the things that would make this place great. So flowers on the sidewalk, $1,000 in permitting. Shade awnings, $1,000. Cafe seating, $1,000. Sidewalk merchandise is illegal. And then crowds gathering is illegal. So we looked at that block and we said, obviously it's illegal for us to do anything to make this come to life. So what happens if we take a weekend and we break every law we possibly can? So that's what we did. We painted our own bike lanes and painted our own, the Dutch style that I liked with the cars on the other side. And we added our own historic lights and we thinned the streets and we took away car lanes and we added cafe seating. We painted murals on the buildings and we strung lights between the Christmas lights between the buildings as well. We went in and we took all the empty buildings and we put businesses we wish we had that were retail establishments. So cafes and bookstores and flower shops, bike shops. To build a bookstore, we found it was easy. We just kind of put an email out saying, hey, put your spare books out on the curb. We'll pick them up in the neighborhood, and we'll make a bookstore. And then we printed off all the laws and the rules we were breaking, and we put them in the windows. And we invited our city staff and our mayor out and said, hey, come out to our better block. Because, by the way, we got no permits. Because we started the process of, let's have a conversation about how we get permits. And we found out, hey, we want to string Christmas lights between the streets, between the buildings. And the city said, that's going to take months, and that's totally illegal, and we don't even know how to do that. So we're like, okay, well, our problem is we asked. So we learned not to do that. So what happened, though, was after we invited the city staff out and we built the block the way we wish we'd always had it, the city said, this is a much better place. We would much rather have a place that looks like this. And in short order, we started seeing the changes that we put temporarily on the ground stick. We saw businesses that we created become permanent. This is an art store, kids' art classes. They do a lot of great things in our neighborhood. They actually work with the Dallas Museum of Arts. They work at the Modern Art Museum now, too, and do interventions there. And it's been this kind of catalyst for our neighborhood for the arts movement. Those fees for the sidewalk cafes that were $1,000 are now $100. So you have to just go through the regular permitting process and all those things. So those got reduced dramatically. And then people ask me what happens when you break all those laws and rules and all. This is my friend Scott who helped us print off all the rules and identified them. Scott's now our city council member. So we found there's a one-to-one correlation between breaking laws and becoming a public servant. One of the other things we found was when looking at places like this, I started trying to understand why do we love places like this? And the urban design students will know this probably because you've gone through this, but I didn't know what it was he loved about this. But I was really fascinated in the science of these things. Why is it that people keep showing pictures of these things? These little these thin, tiny roads with buildings kind of hugging them that create these hallways that have this interesting friction and landscaping is embedded in them. And this street the scale and the friction and all the stuff you see is the exact same way in Paris, and it's the same way in Mexico City, and it's the same way in Tokyo, and it's the same way in Johannesburg. We've created this scale regularly. It's like bees creating a honeycombs. We know how to do this, but we don't seem to do this anymore, but we did it regularly. This is the way we would build spaces. And then when I started understanding the science of it, I started kind of realizing that, you probably have, if you've read a book called Cognitive Architecture, but talks about this idea that, the reason why we love these types of things is actually, it's very scientific. They've studied this in rats actually as well. There's a term called thigmotaxis. And what thigmotaxis means basically is how our response towards being close to an edge. So, and how humans kind of feel when they're around. We are what's called edge-clinging creatures. We like to be near edges, and that's been studied by William White and all kinds of people for a long time. The interesting thing is they found this in rats. And so to test thigmotaxis and thigmotactic responses, what they'll do is, to test anti-anxiety medications, because Rats will feel very anxious if they're in an open field, right? Because they feel like a bird's going to come down and get them. Just like we would feel very anxious if we were in an open savanna 10,000 years ago because a saber-toothed tiger is going to come after us. They found, though, when they're testing out new anti-anxiety medications and Prozacs and things like that, they'll test them on rats, and what they'll do is if they're working, the rats will get further away from the wall, right? And so that's because they feel more comfortable with that. So really all that's telling us is that all this new anti-anxiety medication we're doing is allowing us to be comfortable with the environment that we built that looks like this. So this making us okay with this, right? One of the big components that was important for us for our work in Oak Cliff was that the city of Dallas had this mantra of think big. And what think big did for us was it meant that we were going to spend $140 million to have an Italian architect design a bridge for us. Or it meant that we were going to have a world-class convention center hotel. That's what think big got us. And what we found was actually the places that I love, like that little street I showed you, were actually these little small spaces. And they are these small spaces that are filled with 100 little things that were connected together like this beautiful coral reef. And they were built with a lot of people in the neighborhood that all have their interesting different personalities baked into those things. So, and I also found like the blocks that I love around the world, whether it be in Paris or it's in London or it's in here in Detroit or in Dallas back home. It's this little block I go to regularly that may have a little bodega, a little cafe, a flower shop, bike shop, bookstore. It's got cafe seating outside where I can drink a beer. It's got clocks. It's got lights that are lining the street. It's got landscaping. It's got 100 little things. And I thought as a community we can build 100 little things a lot faster than we can build that one big thing that we're hoping creates the 100 little things. And we can do it with tools that we can find at the hardware store. We can use white duct tape because it looks just like thermoplastic paint that cities use to stripe the ground. We can use white chalk, spray chalk. We can use shade cloth to make bike infrastructure. We can take straw wattles that they use to keep trash out of the gutters during construction sites and make new curbs and landscape them and do them in a way so the cars make a serpentine motion and not straight high-speed motions. We can take those wraps off the city buses, right, that have all the advertising on them and take the scraps and make crosswalks. And then we can go to the city and say, hey, this intersection's too wide and too fast and it's broken. And they'll say, it's going to take us years and lots of planning and millions of dollars. And we can get our team out, and in a weekend, we can fix it ourselves. And this is what we found is it's really not that hard to do. And the thing is, the city now takes these plans, and they're like, hey, this is great. In fact, this street's now being converted into a two-way. It was a one-way. It's taken us a while to get to that process because a lot of political stuff has happened. But it's happened. A lot of it's been because of the work that we created in the Better Block Project. Well, I would say it's all because of this work. People also ask me, how do you get away with breaking all these laws in broad daylight? I said, I found you can break any law you want as long as you wear an orange vest. All right, one of the things that I would show people before we kick off a project often is I show a picture like this. And this is in Montmartre, Paris. And this is a restaurant called La Maison Rose. And it's, if I look at this space and I think, man, I wish I had this in my neighborhood. I would walk here every day to get a cup of coffee. I want to grow old here, and I want to sit there as an old man reading the newspaper, and then I want my kids to work there, and I love these little streets, and I love how the landscaping just pours out of the old buildings, and I just love how it's rich with texture and feeling. It feels alive. And when I show this to other people, they would say, well, yeah, I am the exact same way. I wish we had this in our neighborhood as well. I would go there every day. I would take my friends there, and we'd put on postcards. And so we'd ask this question. We noticed that everyone would say, yeah, we all want this. Like, well, if we all collectively agree we want places that look like this and feel like this, then why do we keep building places that look like this? And that was kind of the big transformation for our communities to realize, like, this stuff feels so soul-crushing. It's nothing to be proud of. It's nothing, and I know Howard Kunstler talks about this a lot, so I won't belabor this point, but these are places that evoke very, very stark emotions compared to the other places. Imagine if you were a poet and you're writing poetry, what are you going to write here as compared to here? Actually, you're probably going to write some amazing things here because you're so incredibly depressed. Might be Bukowski-esque. So I'm going to show you guys some examples of some kind of ways that we're having to kind of work in these communities where we have these big scale, right? All I'm trying to do is dramatically reduce scale, right? Rapidly. So this is a grocery store I had in Denton, Texas. This is a project we're trying to figure out. Okay, I've got a large eave that kind of sits out from this building here, this old grocery store that's been closed. And basically, the housing prices have dropped in the neighborhood because this is the only kind of retail merchant that was around. And once it died, everything imploded around it. So kind of looking at how do we make that into a main street, we kind of designed this idea of like making small storefronts in the front, like little main street storefronts. And we'll bring food trucks in and we'll create the other hallway edge that's missing. And then with the food trucks, we can build parklets. And outside those parklets, so we'll have a parklet attached to a food truck so you can have that cafe seating experience. And it's hot in Texas, so the community said they wish they had splash parks. It's like, well, we can't afford a splash park, but we have hay bales because it's in the rural community. So we'll make hay bale splash pools. Because when you're in the South, we do things like that. And then we can build stages with pallets and things like that. And we can take horse troughs and make fountains as well. And then we make that block look like this, really quickly. So those Main Street little storefronts, that's just, all that is scaffolding and billboards from the sides of the highway that we took and we just repainted. And we made little windows. And I mean, this is all pretty lo-fi and rigged, but the community helped us build this here. We used pallets to make the pallets. Again, the dimensions are pretty close to the other picture I showed you. That's all I'm trying to do is recreate that scale. And as soon as you create that, everybody in the community is like, oh, I know what this is supposed to be, and I love this. I love how this feels. All right, a story I like to tell a lot here in a community, because I think a lot of people make this assumption. In fact, we were having this great conversation earlier here with one of your adjunct professors about this need to like not create committees and not go into this over-meeting and over-planning process that we want to do as people. For some reason, I don't know why, but we feel like we were wired up to just kind of go into a series of 30-year meetings. This is an example and I study a lot of like military generals now because I'm like, these guys had to do things fast, right? This is Napoleon. This is a story I like about Napoleon is Napoleon was exiled. But many people don't know he was exiled actually twice in his life. The last time, of course, was for good. But the first time was he was exiled to an island called the Isle of Elba, which is off of Italy. And he's captured, and then he's sent over to the Isle of Elba. He's given sovereignty over the island of about 30,000 inhabitants. And these 30,000 inhabitants are living in squalor. There's a lot of poverty. And he looks around and just kind of concerned for their quality of life and out of boredom, he says. He goes and he starts looking around. He's like, all right, well, first of all, your farming methods are from the Dark Ages. So let's update those. So he updates the farming methods. Then he realizes the school curriculums the kids are learning, those are actually from the Dark Ages too. So let's update those as well. He updates those. He realizes they didn't have any natural resources that they could be reselling. But he found that in the BC times, there used to be iron mines there. So he gets iron mining happening again on the island. And then he decides to create an army. And then he decides to create a navy, and he gets himself off the island and becomes the Emperor of France again. And he did all of that in 300 days. So it shows you, be careful, who you put in charge. One person can make a dramatic change in an atmosphere of a community. And really, it's just aligning all of the resources you have here and letting the community feel empowered to realize, like, we can do great things. And that's what I think is exciting about this whole kind of tactile urbanism movement or this kind of activism, design activism movement and all these other things that are taking place now. It's this tool that can be given to, that you guys can help lead or facilitate with the community so they can recognize, oh, there's a way out. There's a way to fix these problems. Because I think a lot of people, including myself, just felt helpless. And that sucks. There's nothing worse than just feeling helpless. Like you can't fix the problem. This tactical, getting things on the ground, getting things, working with your hands again. I was in Akron, Ohio last weekend, and I've got a project where I have these Bhutanese refugees I'm working with, and I have them just disassembling pallets, just cutting them down, using saws, and throwing them through planers. And people don't work with their hands as much anymore. Everyone's pushing pixels these days. The idea of this physicality here was so exciting. Everyone's taking pictures of each other, and they're all laughing and having a good time. And I'm thinking our great-grandparents would have been like, oh, another day cutting wood. But now it's like this reason to celebrate. So think about that too when you're doing these things. This is a chance for physicality, for bringing people together to do these interactions together, because people connect deeper when they do something that's using their hands. You'll notice like, we can have a conversation across the table and it can be a good solid rapport. But when we start playing cards together, all of a sudden the other stuff starts coming out. And the interesting things can happen. The same thing, people start dancing, and people start doing anything, cooking together, doing some kind of physical activity together will build a more solid rapport and connection with communities. Okay, I'm going to just talk about a couple more projects here. This is one that just kind of show the methods that we've used, because there's a lot of ways you can approach this tactical idea, right? I had it in Dallas. We've talked about since 1998 about building the world's largest linear park, bigger than Central Park. It's been a big deal. We passed a bond in '98 for like $200 million or something to do this park. It got hijacked by a highway group that said that, you know what, we need to have, this is actually a lot of free land here, we're going to build a toll road here. And so because we went to the toll road, but we'll have a toll road and a park. Well, the toll road has taken all kinds of time and energy and resources because they want to build it on a levee system. And this has never been done. And after Katrina, everyone was like, you don't build things on levees. So it's basically all it's done is it's stopped the park. But there is a group that's been trying to raise millions of dollars to do these fancy park amenities, like kayaking structures and like these kind of solar-powered like umbrella lighting systems. And we were coming in saying, like, will you just give us a trail? We just want a trail to go in and out of this space because it's a beautiful green space and we have no way to get to access it and use it as it is. Talking to a lot of people and hearing people were getting frustrated that nothing was happening, and now it's 20 years on, we got together with some friends and was like, you know what, forget it, we'll just do it ourselves. We got some riding lawnmowers and we started making our own trails. And the city saw what we were doing. And at that point, they're like, the community can't be just coming out here and making their own trails. This is our city project. And within a year, we actually had them paved. So that 20-year process got reduced down to a year just because we just started doing it on our own. So just another example of how these things can kind of work here. Oh, sorry showing that. Okay, so lastly, I'm going to kind of show you where our projects have led and what we've been doing recently. Last year, we got to work with the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation. We started a project in Akron, Ohio. Said, come in and do a better block here. And they gave us a little more time. We usually work in about 100-day spans. We don't like to work in much longer than that because people will overthink problems we found. So we let's get in short time frames, commit ourselves, and get out there and start swinging some hammers. This project, though, gave us more time to engage. We had a wide street. This Akron suffers from the same things Detroit did, depopulation. This is where all the tires were made. So Goodyear and B.F. Goodrich and all those folks were here. So the streets were too wide. We had a lot of empty buildings, a lot of gaps in the buildings. And beyond that, we did have growth, though, because we had Bhutanese refugees moving into the neighborhood, being settled here by the International Institute of Akron. But there's been a 100-year history of refugee resettlement from going back from the early 30s, the late 30s with Italians coming into the neighborhood. So there's a lot strong Italian culture, and now there's Bhutanese people moving in. So we started developing ideas for how do we thin the street? Let's add bike infrastructure. Let's study Italian piazzas. And from these little towns where we found this community was coming from originally in the late 30s, and let's recreate those in these parking lots. And we'll take the other, the turn-ins for cars, and we'll make bocce ball courts. And we'll try to make businesses to go with them. So we'll make espresso stands because we need a symbiotic relationship between the public space and the private space. Because the public space needs something that helps sustain it, right? We'll also work with the Bhutanese and see if we can get this dumpling restaurant built. And we'll do a clothing store built with Bhutanese apparel as well. And then we'll do an international welcoming center and a bike shop. And all working with community members who are interested in doing these kind of ideas. And we publish this kind of workshops, and this is where our work really kind of dials in that connecting with the community. We go out there and we say, come out and help us build furniture with pallets for 2 hours on a Friday. Enroll now, it's free. Or help us build a facade for a storefront. Or help us build a pallet stage workshop. Or a water feature. Or fix the streets with us for 2 hours on a Saturday. And then we go out, now we've been actually working with cities. So this guerrilla project that was kind of unsanctioned, unpermitted before, cities are clamoring for change now. They realize there's so many broken things. They want things fixed now. So this is us working with the city street crews, and we just fill their street machines with kids' finger paint, basically. It's called tempera paint. and then we get other teams to go in and line them with the white duct tape because it looks just like thermoplastic paint, especially when you use 4-inch white duct tape. And then it looks like just like you see in Portland, right? This was built like 2 or 3 hours prior by the people that are riding on it. This is just kind of lining the street with street trees as well, so I can show how you get shade in the bike lane and shade on the sidewalk as well. This is us using the scraps from the buses to make mid-block crossings. The city said we don't know about mid-block crossings, and we're like, let's test it out, and it showed it worked. This is that parking lot. So we get a bunch of dirt and some hay bales and volunteers from Joann's Fabrics, and in 2.5 hours it becomes an Italian piazza. There's a bocce ball court we built with an Italian kind of fraternal order in the neighborhood. This is us building parklets with pallets, which we'll do regularly as well. So with the Better Block, we're really just taking the concepts of those tactical urbanism ideas and putting them into a system, right? The 100 little things. And because they all go together. You can't, if I just built the bike lane, it wouldn't work nearly as well as if I didn't have the bike shop with it. The cafe seating is going to work a lot better if I've got a cafe I build with it. And I guarantee the community wants that cafe too. This is the bike shop that we built in the empty building. This is the picture of the street being used. And I know this looks like I pulled these out of Rhino's library. I didn't. Those are real people waving and smiling with lights and stuff like that. But this happened to be me on a scissor lift taking the picture at this kind of perfect time. But yeah, people kind of filing down. I will say that about 10 minutes later, the storms came in and just broke down, and everyone was ducking for cover. But it was still a blast. And now we're publishing recipes, so you can go to our betterblock.org website and you can see how we do this stuff. Because our thing is I want everybody doing this stuff, right? Because we need to fix a lot of places fast. Now what's really exciting for us too is just out of happenstance, I was trying to figure out ways to build things faster. Because oftentimes I'm scarce on resources. There may not be pallets everywhere. I got inspired by the Wiki House movement that was happening in London and got to go there and kind of construct a house and realized this would be a great tool for us to rapidly start building some of these things that we build all the time, like parklets and flower boxes as bike separators. So you will have this library of elements that are open source that anyone can, if they're doing a better block, go to the Wiki Block library, download, go to your local makerspace, and cut out, we want to reverse engineer Vancouver's flower boxes they use for their bike lanes. So the kid in Duluth can go and make a bike lane in his own neighborhood as well. And that was really, honestly, just came out of necessity for us because I need to get a lot of things created rapidly. It was also looking at, this is a project in London where they took the side of a building with a parking lot, painted fake windows on it, and did this small storefronts. And I thought that was kind of my inspiration for that grocery store project. But I wanted to get even more solid with our materials. So our next level here is now using these the digital fabrication methods here for the projects. But we're also, beyond that though, we're also excited about just finding any way to rapidly transform a space, especially places that are suffering from some kind of issue. Again, this is just like in Detroit, they've got depopulation. We've got excess houses in Akron. So after we got to know the Bhutanese people, I'm sitting there getting to know these amazing families, going to baby naming ceremonies and eating samosas on the floor and just having this wonderful time. I'm like, how do we help these people? So this is a project we're doing called the Exchange House. We're taking a house and we're converting it into an Airbnb hostel that a family can live in as well, and they can make money off of the hostel itself to help cover the cost of the renovation, because right now they can't get a lot of loans for the area because the housing value is less than what the banks would want to loan out. So this is our way to tackle that. But we're also making a community garden in the backyard, and we're building a Bhutanese-inspired Main Street, which is going to be using the Wiki Block elements as well. And we're working pretty closely with Kent State and their digital fabrication lab on that. But what I'm excited about it is this, especially even being here at Lawrence Tech, is that opportunity for us to start connecting communities with universities and using these resources. I know I can tell at Portland State University, PSU is working with their engineering students. They're doing capstones with Better Blocks and getting infrastructure actually built after the capstone's over. So a lot of these students are getting hired by the city because they figured out the processes. And that Better Block that we started in 2010 just to try to fix in our own neighborhood and fix a block, people started asking us how to do it. And I fixed computer for a living, so I didn't have time to go work on other projects. So I said, here's a how-to guide, here's how we did it. Started going all over the country. And then within a year, it started going around the world. So from Melbourne and Sydney, Australia, to Tehran, Iran. And when the people from Tehran, Iran called me and asked me about breaking laws, I was like, I don't know about breaking laws in Tehran, Iran. I think the stakes might be a little higher. All right, and so I kind of found this interesting way to get things happening quickly, right, through our neighborhood. And we started doing all this fun stuff started happening because of this. Like we were getting kids to ride bicycles, so I decided, I'm going to run for U.S. Congress because I had a free April. And then I was like, I got to lecture at Harvard, and then we were in the New York Times, and I got to have dinner with Michelle Obama, and then we're in the Venice Biennale. Like, all these cool things started happening because of these interesting little tricks we figured out to make things move in our neighborhood. And I remember at the time thinking like, wow, what can stop us? We can kind of do anything we want. We can transform anything here. But the one thing that stopped me completely in my tracks was in 2012, I was diagnosed with stage 3 cancer. And then everything stopped. This was after the TED Talk. So all that stuff was happening, and all these cool things are going on. I'm like, oh, I'm not going to live to ride my trolley. I'm not going to get on the bike lanes. I'm not going to get to see these blocks grow up. I'm not going to see these little shops that we helped create. And the crazy thing was, when I was sick as a dog with being loaded up with chemotherapies and everything else, my community in my neighborhood who helped me build these better blocks saw that I was in bad shape, and they started coming to my house and started filling my refrigerator, and they started checking on my kids, and they started feeding my pets, and then they started doing these Let's Build a Better Jason campaigns. And so what I tell people what happened after all that Better Block stuff was I got a neighborhood, and that's what all this stuff is about. So I think when you're thinking about what are you doing with architecture and urban planning and urban design, everybody craves a neighborhood. Everybody wants a sense of belonging. Everybody feels isolation. Everybody has those things. And there are these interesting, wonderful tools that can gather people together and make them feel like a neighborhood again. And you guys kind of have the keys for that. And that's it. Thanks, guys. I will add, because I always forget, last year I was diagnosed as being cancer-free, so I'm going to make it. We're good. I forget to say that so often, and people think I'm dying up here. I'm just like, oh, man. And they take pictures with me, and they're just like this forlorn look, like my last day with them. Anyways, does anyone have any questions? Yes.
Asking for donations and then we do all the work, which doesn't get people involved. So how do you guys go about getting these things funded? I mean, I know they're all kind of individual elements, so are the community members helping to pay for all those things, or are there donations that are coming in and then everybody's doing the work, or how does that kind of come together?
That's a good question. So how do the projects get funded? I'll say those early projects we did for almost $1,000. There's a project I didn't show. You've probably seen, if you've seen the TED Talk with 42 trees. We did that for no money. We borrowed a lot, and fortunately those projects were ephemeral, and now we've gotten into, so we can borrow or we can build with the scraps we have around. What we found is, we will kind of set a number for projects now. Like, this is some ideas that we'll distill, like what the community is saying was wrong, and try to come up with some concepts to construct. And we'll say, this is what we think we can build. And we'll need a small budget. Usually it's like under $5,000. For that, we can usually find local partners in the neighborhood because it's a number that's accessible. What happens through the process, though, is people will say, I really want to take this restaurant I've created temporarily and make it more robust and more things. And so they'll start running their own campaigns. So they might do their own Kickstarters or find other connections to neighborhood resources to help them. In fact, we've gotten a lot better at, now that we're bringing so many people together, saying, hey, you know what, let's bring the Chamber of Commerce here or the Economic Development Office over here and have them work together. I am also actively looking for ways to get funding after I leave a project. So like the Akron project, I'm working with them right now to develop a CDC. So those are things that we have to be thinking about. We have to be like, how does this keep getting funded? So you have to It's like, how do I make this bocce ball court stay and get taken care of? Like, I got to build a coffee shop. Okay, coffee shop, they'll take care of it, and they'll take the tables and chairs out. And so it's understanding that symbiosis, managing the equation of co-responsibility, they say. This, bring as many partners as possible and give everybody a little piece of ownership. Just look at with 100 artists that came in and all did one thing each. Figuring out a way to fragment your thing into 100 little things. And then hopefully, again, it's compelling enough that you catch the attention of one or two that really are like, I can write a bigger check if need be. And that's kind of happened. I think you know this. You go through that process and you're scared to death. And you're like, oh, we have no money. And like, but I tell people, like, that house project, like, I ran out of money it was a 1.5 long project. I ran out of money in the first 4 or 5 months after planning and stuff. But I'm just like, just tear the walls down. I don't care. Just get, like, I want to see dirt flying, like, and we're gonna run out of money. It doesn't matter. And people saw what was happening from the neighborhood, and they're just like, this one little foundation, like, we'll donate this, because we just hit a lot of unforeseeables, like, permitting and whatever, lead abatement and all that kind of stuff that we hadn't planned for. I think people see things happening and they get fired up, and then it's enough and then I don't want to miss that train. So a little bit of storytelling, I guess, to help. Other questions? Yes.
You talked about all the successes. Can you talk about a failure that you learned from that created more successes?
Yeah, so I can tell you, I could do a series of presentations on failures. It'll be much longer than this presentation. But yeah, in fact, I would say a lot of things that we've learned along the way. And because we work in these rapid, tight time frames, the nice thing is it exposes the problems really fast. And because we work ephemerally, with light materials, and we're taking things in and out, I get to learn the city's processes really quickly. So I'll put a lot of, one of the things I learned is don't tell everybody what you're doing. Don't tell the city all the things you're doing, because they don't have a script that says, because I'll say I want to build a traffic circle in the North Hill neighborhood of Akron, Ohio. And they're like, well, that's not on the book, and so no. So I just we're just going to do a block party in Akron, Ohio. That's what I'll say. So getting too much detail out there, because people are naturally in a no kind of scenario. And a lot of that's a fear of liability, and we get insurances for all our projects. Other things, there was a time whenever I would say just show up from Thursday and Friday from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. and help us build a better block. And what I found was I would get like 10 volunteers right at 5, and like a smattering at 7, and then at 7:45 there'd be 100 would show up, and then so I learned to segment this into workshops, into a series of I need 10 people here in this time frame. I need 5 people here in this, working on these bike lanes. I also learned that people working in groups need to work in small segments. They love to do labor and heavy lifting. You can't get much more than 3 hours out of them, though, before they're exhausted and they want to go. So you got to have food. And so having the picnic table set up, which you'll learn from Habitat for Humanity, which is a great partner we've had as well, but just understanding kind of human psychology and this, making sure that everything is laid out and clear and IKEA-like. That's where design really comes in well. I've also learned that don't build projects where there's not a neighborhood in close proximity. We've done those before, where a city came in and said, fix this area. We're like, okay, we'll try to fix this. And we couldn't find a community close enough or that was dense enough to actually help us swing hammers. So at that point, it was like, this wouldn't be able to be sustained because there's not a community here that can help sustain the things we're creating. It's really tricky to work around environments that are just inhumane inherently. So overpasses and canyons for highways, and I see a lot of interesting, wonderful ideas that are addressing those things, but I still think the infrastructure itself is inherently inhumane, and the things that we're doing are just Band-Aids, because we don't build things we never built things like that before. So I've seen some of the most amazing things under underpasses that were arts-led and architecturally led. But again, just anecdotally, in the projects I've done, the feelings evoked from being in the space around this noisy, loud, dangerous 80-mile-an-hour kind of highway is just enough for people to be like, I don't really want to sit out here and stay out here. Lots more lessons, but those are just a few. Other questions? Yes.
What kind of role does social media play in like incipient stages or even like grand opening projects?
So it's huge. I mean, so that's the whole FOMO, the fear of missing out. So it's like during the whole process, we're documenting the growth, you know, in a short amount of time, like showing it in despair and the plans, and then the teams coming out in small groups, kind of doing things like and tagging people all over the place because I need their friends to see it. That's huge for us. So it's like the tagging feature alone is how I get more volunteers. So social media is huge. You know, small short videos. We make those of every one of our projects as well. But that's 90% of our messaging is that. And then, you know, we get some earned media, but I don't think it's nearly as powerful as the social. Other questions? Yes.
Yeah, where's the streetcar project now?
Okay, good question. So the streetcar has crossed over. So there's actually a whole fun story about the streetcar. But the city, when they found out, so just so you guys know, the city of Dallas was working on it, trying to get a streetcar, a downtown circulator. That was going to be a little visitors loop. But they were never really writing any grants or doing any, they were just kind of doing a lot of kind of charrette exercises related to it. We came with our little group and said, hey, we're going to apply for this Tiger grant. And they're like, okay, go ahead, Oak Cliff, you know, good luck. You know, it's, you know, it's, you know, I guess I didn't include the slide on here, did I? That's why you're asking that question. I won a grant for $23 million when we brought the streetcar back. So, hold on, you guys will like this. I'm going to pull up something real fast here because it's worth showing. Oh man, I can't. Oh, never mind. I don't have it. But I usually show a picture of me in front of my streetcar. So they said it would take us. I talked to Rick Gustafson, who was the head of the streetcar project in Portland, Oregon, and he said it took them 15 years. So expect to take at least 15 years. It took us 5. And so what I found is, and this conversation we had about committees and all, cities can work really fast if there's something that's motivating them to work fast. Just like in war, you know, like when I use this illusion with Patton, it was saying like, look, I got to get across, you know, this river because we're being attacked from here, and we need to get this done over here, and I've got 1,000 people and with tanks and jeeps that I need to get across. They start figuring out how to make things. There's not this like, let's go ahead and form a committee, and let's go back. We'll do some feasibility analysis and some studies. Like, it's not, like, no, like we just go. So that's what happened with the streetcar. I can't believe I forgot that slide. It's an epic slide to miss out on here. But yeah, we brought it back. We had a 0.3% chance of getting any funds at all. Got $23 million, which is half of what we wanted. Now, the streetcar cuts through deep into my neighborhood now. In fact, they're finishing the phase 2 of our line. All the land that was beside it was a lot of just empty fields. Has all been acquired. So a lot of mixed-use development happening. That's getting kicked off. In fact, there was an old dairy that had been kind of not working so well for a while. It was this giant manufacturing kind of thing that was right on the edge of our community, overlooking into downtown. That just got leveled, and they're doing a whole development now there. And that's going to be within a block from the streetcar. So yeah, streetcar's back. Other questions? Yes.
Have you ever run into any issues, especially when you're an outsider coming into a community where the community is resistant to the idea? I mean, I know there's so many fears now of kind of over-gentrification and communities being pushed out as things change.
Yeah, so we're pretty clear that if we're doing a project or we're facilitating a project in another city, that we are not leading it. And so we'll come in and say, this is led by the community. We're usually brought in by a local organization. We'll say, you guys but I've dealt with, in fact, I dealt with in Norfolk, Virginia. We did 3 projects there. The second project there, though, was really dicey. It was a low-income African-American neighborhood. And there was a division inside of the neighborhood, though, between kind of an old guard and a new guard, all African-American, both sides. But the old guard was clashing with the new guard. They had created their own committees. And so so we had been asked to help develop a better block with the community. And we said, there's too much friction here. And so we'll do another community here that's already asking for one. And so we went to this other community. The 2 splintered groups like saw that and said like, look, we want to do this. This is beneficial. And so they had folks that weren't as polarizing on both committees or communities and come together and create a new organization that could actually do something. So and that was a direct kind of like, that was kind of this older guard saying this is gentrification. We try to tell people like, for us, we are building this with the neighborhood and it's for the neighborhood. It's using the neighborhood's resources. So it's, for me, it's kind of the opposite of gentrification in the sense of like, that's mass, radical displacement and just shunning of a neighborhood and just somebody else sucking up the wealth. This is the community saying like, hey, let's create and capture the wealth ourselves in our own neighborhood and do what we do best. In fact, I had a great project in a community where we were going around. It's a low-income neighborhood. It's in South Dallas. And they're like, we don't have a lot here. And so we're looking around, and there's a lot of liquor stores and a lot of weeds overgrown and a lot of bars in the windows. And we're just riding around bicycles looking for stuff like what can we do, what can we bring together that can be a way that this neighborhood could celebrate its assets. And we're like started hearing like, if we see these little shotgun churches, and we're like, we can hear gospel music. So like we got gospel music. And then we're riding around some more, and we see all these guys in their front yard, and their gas had been turned off, so they're cooking barbecue in the front yards. And so we're like, well, why don't we do gospel barbecue? And so we did this giant block of gospel barbecue, and the neighborhood came out, and they're like, I'm like, this is what we do. We do this natively, naturally. This is just in our DNA. And I said, and we had people come out, and they're like, I would get on an airplane and go, 5 hours and spend $1,000 to experience what I had no idea existed in my own backyard. And so it was an interesting project in the sense of we're trying to show like, you got everything you need right here, just allocate it a new way, that Napoleon, just put it in this different kind of line, and you can have it, and it can be something that you can earn an income from. Any other questions? All right, thank you so much, y'all.
I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight. We're working on next year's series of lectures. Stay tuned. Be safe. Good luck in your finals and have a great summer. Ciao, everyone. Ciao.
All right, thanks so much.